Many years ago, when I was an undergraduate student and studying industrial design, I became interested in subterranean architecture. Given the human population's ability to live underground or even in earth-sheltered housing would be a tremendous cost savings in energy and security. Just 6 feet of earth on top of a significant part of a structure would make it so that the year-round temperature could be maintained at 65 degrees Fahrenheit. This would mean that you would only need to cool a fraction of what we currently do to remain comfortable in the summer, and a fraction of what we would need to warm ourselves in the winter. Remember, this would have been the late 1970s and the Arab oil embargo, and when costs, for gas and oil and things like that were tremendously high. It really at that time had nothing to do with climate change. Imagine how things might have changed and be much different than that now. At the time, I was also taking a class in psychology that required that I produce a study paper. And as with any good study, I needed to take things to an extreme first in order to defend my rather moderate position for living underground. So I began to delve into sensory deprivation, light deprivation, etc., etc. That is what caused me to bump into this book, Health in Light by John Ott. The following is a film that was originally produced by John Ott and is still available on YouTube. Ott's original profession was finance, and he had a keen interest in time-lapse photography, and created an elaborate laboratory here in Winnetka, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. He passed away in 2000 at the age of 90. I must confess to be borrowing liberally from this 2-hour documentary because it was made sometime in the late 50s or early 1960s, as you can tell from the quality of the film and the narration. The editing is due to the fact that it's pretty dense materially, and I wanted to concentrate on many of the important and very significant color and light discoveries that he made over the course of many, many years of exhausting research, and because of that, I edited portions of this footage. Now, I apologize for the audio, but it's pretty much the way that it comes out on YouTube as well. We'll be seeing more examples here in other discussions to come. Here, then, is John Ott in his own words.
Hello, I'm John Ott, and I would like to show you the time-lapse greenhouse where I make time-lapse pictures of flowers growing. It is made of ultraviolet transmitting plastic that transmits the full spectrum of natural sunlight, as I have found with most plants that this is necessary in order to grow the strongest and healthiest specimens. Other factors, including nutrition and moisture, are of course also very important, as well as air, and especially humidity when it comes to growing orchids. Humidity, though, is also a problem in keeping the film in the cameras for the long periods of time necessary to photograph a growing plant, so the long plastic hoses bring conditioned air to the aluminum hoods over each camera. Time-lapse photography is just the opposite from slow-motion pictures, and here you can see a bird of paradise burst into bloom in a matter of a few seconds. Here you see some of the additional attachments and gadgets that I borrowed from the works from the old kitchen clock that I used to make my first automatic timer. Before building the ultraviolet transmitting greenhouse, I made my time-lapse pictures in this basement studio that I called my ivory cellar. The cameras and subjects were under this skylight, which made it necessary to supplement the restricted daylight with various types of artificial light sources. Each time a single frame is exposed in any of the cameras, the supplemental growing lights are turned off momentarily, the overhead shutters closed to shut out the daylight, so I have the same amount of photographic light for an even exposure, day and night, and regardless of the weather. Here is a time-lapse picture speeding up the action of taking time-lapse pictures so that you can see how the cameras move forwards and backwards, they tilt up and down and pan from side to side as programmed in advance to follow the growing subjects. At normal speed, the hand cranks turn about the same speed as the hand on a clock, so this will give you an idea of approximately how much some of the action is speeded up through time-lapse photography. These flowers all grew quite well without any difficulty, but the first problem that I encountered with any possible scientific significance came as the result of attempting to grow a pumpkin from the emergence of the first shoot to the mature pumpkin for Walt Disney's film, Secrets of Life. I planted some pumpkin seeds in large boxes of soil and placed them under the skylight in the ivory cellar where the young plants received some direct sunlight around noon when the sun was directly overhead, but not during the morning or afternoon as they would outdoors. So I installed some ordinary fluorescent light fixtures with cool white fluorescent tubes that are very rich in the yellow-orange part of the spectrum because of more energy in these particular wavelengths. They're designed this way to give a warmer tone to cosmetics and interior decorations. Here you see the tendrils reaching out to some solid object for support. As soon as they find something, they wrap themselves around and get a good firm grip, then start winding themselves up to form a natural spring that snubs the plant down, and they won't break so easily. The first thing that I learned about a pumpkin was that it is a monoecious type of plant, meaning that it produces the staminate and pistillate blossoms separately on the same vine. Here you see some of the staminate blossoms, extra large, healthy specimens. The leaves are nice and green right to the very tip point of each leaf, indicating no apparent nutritional deficiencies. But while all the staminate blossoms grew so nicely, I suddenly realized that all of the pistillate blossoms with their little embryo of the pumpkin right under the flower would only reach this early stage of development and then stop right there and dry up, turn black, and drop off the vine. So I didn't get any pumpkins. The second year, my lights were old and beginning to flicker. So without asking for one type of light or another, I bought some new fluorescent tubes, and the second year, all the pistillate blossoms grew very nicely, and all the staminate blossoms dried up and dropped off. This was just the opposite from the previous year. I repeated this experiment a number of times and found that I could obtain 100% staminate or pistillate blossoms on a pumpkin vine by simply supplementing the restricted daylight with either cool white or daylight white fluorescent, which I happened to be using the second year. Daylight white fluorescent is strong in the blue end of the spectrum. Chinchilla breeders are now able to obtain up to 85 or 90% male or females in the litters, depending on the lights used in the breeding rooms. Here at last is the pumpkin that was in Walt Disney's film, Secrets of Life. And here are the two types of light, side by side, next to the skylight. A large seed company asked me to make some time-lapse pictures of morning glories for one of their films, and I thought this would be a very simple project and promised the pictures in about 2 weeks. But well into the second year, they were becoming a little irritated at all the excuses I was offering as to why I could not deliver the films. The reason was the buds would reach the stage where I would expect them to open by the following morning, but instead they would simply shrivel up and collapse. This was the first commercial project undertaken in the new plastic greenhouse, so I tried it again in the old glass greenhouse, but had the same results. Then on one of my gardening television programs, I was interviewing a commercial florist who specialized in bringing chrysanthemums into bloom the year round by controlling the periodicity of the light and also timing the blooming of poinsettias for the Christmas trade by interrupting the night dark time period with artificial light. Meanwhile, I discovered that the morning glories are a night blooming flower, so I decided to hang a light out on the garden fence where they've been blooming perfectly normally all summer. I connected it to the automatic timer in the greenhouse so it turned on for a few seconds every 5 minutes during the dark nighttime period. The next morning, within a perfect circle around the light, the buds were collapsing as they had in the greenhouse. Then I happened to run out of the regular type of film that I was using, and the only film I had available was daylight type Kodachrome. That meant changing the photographic lights to the slightly bluish ones to match the daylight film. The buds began opening just a little, which was the first encouragement I had had in almost 2 years. The only difference that I could see was in the light, so I decided to put some additional blue filters over the slightly bluish lights, and of course it made the picture very blue, but it also filtered out the red, or the longer wavelengths from the spectrum of the photographic light, interrupting the normal dark time period. By filtering out this part of the spectrum, the buds then opened perfectly normally. But the pictures were so blue, I tried placing a red filter over the camera lens to correct the color. To begin with, I had too strong a red filter, and it made the flowers look purple. So by cutting down on the strength of the red filter over the camera lens and keeping the blue filter over the lights, I was finally able to obtain a reasonable color balance photographically, but still basically filter out the red or longer wavelengths from the spectrum of the photographic lights interrupting the normal dark nighttime period. And here at last was the picture of the morning glory. This indicated that this biological response is not to the total spectrum of light interrupting the dark period, but rather a narrow band of the longer wavelengths in the red end of the spectrum.
We'll go on to see other interesting light spectrum discoveries made by John Ott over the course of his many years of doing just this kind of photographic work and research, some of which surprisingly affects very significant aspects of human health. You probably begin to see just how important color and the aspects of light can be beyond the purely aesthetical.